Good afternoone or good morning, depending on where you're coming to view from. My name is Travis Witterski. I'm a welding engineer here at Miller Electric. Today I'm joined with Andy Weinberg, our motorsports manager. And on the line, we've also got James in the background, who is going to be a direct connection for you guys on the stream to us. So thanks for stopping by today. We're going to be doing a Q&A session today. We're also going to cover some content on the Millermatic and Multimatic 255 products. But our main goal here is going to be for as interactive of a process as we can have with you guys. Like I said, we've got James on the line. You guys can come in through the chat function, ask us any questions that you have, welding-wise, Millermatic-wise, Miller-wise, anything like that. We'll try to answer those for you here live on the stream. Anything we don't get to live on the stream, we'll try to follow up with you afterwards towards the end of the stream. James will have his email up there, so you can email him if you've got a question that's a little bit more in-depth or something we haven't covered. You can reach out that way as well. So we're doing these live presentations as part of our There's Only One campaign that's going on right now through August 2nd. We're drawing a winner each week for that. So people who purchase a eligible product can go online, do the product registration with that product with the Only One code, and then be eligible to win a Bobcat 260, Multimatic, or Millermatic 255. And now they've added the Multimatic 220 AC/DC into that mix as well. Here at the end of the stream, we're going to have a few trivia questions. We're going to be doing some giveaways that we'll talk about a little bit more coming up, including a RC-powered electric cooler that I think is pretty sweet giveaway. But before we get into that, let's introduce the Miller team to you. Like I said, Andy's our motorsports manager. Andy, do you want to cover a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Andy Weinberg, and I'm coming at you from my home garage outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I am the motorsports manager for Miller. I've been with Miller for over 30 years. So got experience in the electronics and the service engineering. I was a training instructor for Miller for a while, and now I manage all the motorsport stuff, help do some product videos, things like that. So if you have any questions, like Trav said, feel free to ask them. We'll try, without getting too in depth, we can try and answer those things here, or we can get up with you afterwards. But definitely, this is kind of a low key presentation, if you will. So we're here for you. So yeah, please feel free to ask questions and pay attention too, because like you say, during the live stream, we're going to be asking some questions, and some of those details are going to be part of the answers. So if you want to win something, got to pay attention.
Yeah. And for anybody who might have a technical question coming out, we like to drag Andy back to his service days of years gone by. So I like to see that. So any of those types of questions too that you have, Andy might be able to answer some of them. I might be able to answer some of them. And then some of them, if they're a little bit more in depth, we can reach out to the team internally as well. So feel free to use this as a opportunity to connect with us directly. To do that, we've got James in the background. James, do you want to introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do and where you're at?
Yeah, like Travis said, my name is James. I work with the event marketing team here at Miller. So, my typical work is going around, traveling to trade shows, interacting with you guys, and showing off some of our new equipment. And like Trav said, I'll be moderating the chat today. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. I can pass on any of those questions to the guys on the stream, and they'll be able to get you an answer.
And again, my name's Travis. I'm a welding engineer here with Miller. I've spent the bulk of my time since I got out of school working on shows one way or the other. Spent a lot of time on our roadshow trucks, doing shows like SEMA, PRI. So you guys may have seen me somewhere out along the road, whether at a trade show or with the roadshow truck. I've been with Miller now just going over 10 years, and I am based out of Michigan. So I'm coming to you from my Michigan office. Hopefully we'll all be getting back out in the shop and in the different businesses here shortly. But for now, we want to be able to interact with you guys as best we can. So again, please utilize this opportunity to ask as many questions as you can. We do have some content, like I said, that we're going to cover in order to give you some shot at the giveaways at the end. But if we spend an hour talking about all your guys' questions, we are just fine with that as well. So please feel free to ask anything that you may have. While we're waiting for those first questions to come in, the 255 products are something that are fairly new to the lineup for us being an inverter machine. One of the big differences there that these machines have that the older transformer style machines did not have is pulse capability. So Andy, for some of the people out there that aren't necessarily familiar with pulse or what it looks like, sounds like, could you run us a pair of welds, a short circuit weld versus a pulse weld, and then we can see it, hear it, feel it while we're waiting for those first questions to come in.
Yeah, sure. That'd be a good idea. Let's do that first. I do have both of those machines set up here in my shop, so we can do some sample welds with, you know, MIG, pulse MIG. I even have a spool gun hooked up. We can do some pulse MIG on aluminum, and I got some stuff set up for stainless steel. Yeah. So I've got the Multimatic and the Millermatic 255s. I also have a weld camera set up with a special filter. So I will change over to that camera right now, and that way we can actually get some close-up views of what I'm actually going to be welding and showing. So,
and like Andy said, he's got a few different setups there in the shop. He's also got his camera that will take a look inside some of these machines a little bit later on. So if you guys have questions or want to see something different, let us know. We'll try to fit that in, or we can wrap it up at the end as well. While he's getting set up on that too, I can show you a little bit of a preview of what that cooler is. Like I said, I think this thing's pretty neat. It is pretty small. In my thoughts on what it looks like on camera versus how big it is, it's like a 30-can cooler. So the thing's pretty neat. So please stay tuned for your chance to win that. If you guys are just joining us, we'll be doing some trivia questions at the end. And the first person to come in with the correct answer on the YouTube chat will be selected as the winner of that. So make sure you're signed into YouTube so you can communicate with us and ask questions. But then again, so you can be in the running for these different prizes at the end. The chat log comes in a little bit different. We found on what you may see is who answered a question first versus what comes in on the Miller side of things. We have to go by what comes off on the Miller side. So if you got a question on that at the end on who was selected as a winner or why, please email that to James so we can get that cleared up with you. But again, stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, we'll go back to Andy and he can show us what we've got going on that short circuit versus a pulse weld.
All right. First, I'm going to do short circuit. Here we go. So you'll notice it's got a crisp sound to it. That crisping sound is the wire actually contacting the base metal hundreds of times a second. I'm going to switch over to pulse MIG.
So like Andy said, that regular short circuit MIG, that wire is coming down, striking the plate, exploding, and then coming down and doing that again. So that's where you get that. A lot of people talk about that bacon frying sound. Like Andy said, that's where you get a lot of the spatter from, is from that explosion as well. You guys will notice pulse sounds a whole lot different. It's a pulsed spray process, if you guys are familiar with spray, and we can talk about that a little bit more later on as well. But you can see here, he's going to go over with that same, I'm assuming 0.35 diameter solid wire. This machine, we've also got the same gas hooked up that we'll talk about a little bit later. But that wire is going to come down, it's going to strike once, and then it's going to be a clean spray across that arc. You're not going to hear that bacon frying sound. It's going to sound totally different.
That's correct. So it's more of a high hum.
So for this process, you should never truly hear that bacon frying sound or anything like that. You might get a little bit of a crackle depending on where your settings are at and what type of wire you're running, that kind of thing. But this should look more like a spray transfer. This is a pulse spray, so it's taking that spray process to a background current, letting it cool off a little bit. So we gain the ability to take that spray process out of position, which is a big limitation to a standard spray. Because it's so hot, if you start taking that out of position, typically it would fall out of the weld joint, but a very high quality weld. So pulse gives us the ability to get that high quality weld and take it out of position as well. So a huge advantage to that pulse process there.
Switch to this camera, it's closer to me. And And so if you can see that pulse weld, it does look a lot smoother than the short circuit weld. Now the short circuit weld, I did put more of a little puddle profile in it. It's just a little slower. The pulse MIG still gives me a lot of control, which you do not get in a full spray mode. It also gives you a better tie-in to the toes of the weld, so you're more assured of getting that tie-in. What I did last week is I actually took one of those pulse welds and I cut it in half, so you could actually see how well the toes blend into that piece. I don't know if you can see that well, Trav,
yeah,
but
that looks good.
Yeah, so it definitely is a perfectly fused piece at the toes. So the pulse does give you a much better weld.
Well, and like Andy said, one of the big advantages there is going to be ease of getting a quality weld. So if anybody out there has ever tacked up a couple plates in a T-joint like Andy just did, you put your tack on one end, it looks great. You go and move to the other end of the plate, and that coupon falls over, and you have a little tack on there that looks great, but on the bottom side had absolutely no penetration at all. That problem, that lack of fusion, is pretty common with short circuit. If something's not quite right, if you got grease on the surface, even if you have a heavy mill scale, that can happen quite a bit, and that could go through the whole weld, and you'd never even know it. I was looking at, it was on one of my trailer fenders yesterday, and it's got a little bit of rust under the weld, and you can see, after it's moved down the road a little bit, that weld is completely loose on the bottom because that weld had that lack of fusion issue right there through the whole joint, and they didn't even realize it. Pulse goes to such a high current, and then that background lets it cool off, but that high driving arc force on the high end of the amperage really gives you a quality weld that is penetrating through, if you have that mill scale, something like that, it gives you a whole lot less chance of something like that happening. And now combining that with a machine like the 255, if you're not used to running it, takes some of the questionability away from if your settings are correct. Because at the end of the day, these machines, one of our main focuses, whether it's on short circuit or any of these processes that these will do with the AutoSet Elite, is getting you up and running quickly without having to second guess whether your settings are right or spend a half hour, an hour in your garage trying to get your machine up and running. So we're trying to get you settings to get welding faster, and then in the back of your mind know that you have a quality weld that you're putting down as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, James, any questions coming in for us yet?
We don't have any questions in the chat just yet, but there is a question that I get a lot, and that is, can I TIG weld aluminum with the Multimatic 255?
Not the Multimatic 255. It is a DC only on its TIG side, actually DC only, period. So when you're MIG welding, it's DC. If you're using a spool gun, it's DC, and stick welding is DC in this case, and the TIG welding side is straight DC. If you want to do some AC welding with a Multimatic product, we make the Multimatic 220 AC/DC, which does do both.
So while we're waiting for those questions to come in, again, any of the questions that you have that are welding related, Miller related, product related, we'll try to answer those for you. If they're more detailed than what we can answer here on the stream, James will have his contact information up there towards the end, so you can send those more detailed questions over to him. But we'll try to answer pretty much anything we can for you on the stream. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so please shoot those out there. Sign into that chat function so you can be capable to win the prizes at the end as well. But like Andy said, there's a couple of these two different 255 products that we can look at, and you can kind of customize them on what you need. Machine only, machine with a cart, that kind of thing, which is a little bit unique to that 250 platform versus what it used to be. So Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about that and what some of these different options are?
Yeah, so one of the biggest thing you're going to see right off the bat is the machine sitting all by itself on the side there on the left. And that machine is the baseline package really now, is the machine only. And that was something that we couldn't do before because the bottom of the machine, unlike your 252s or Millermatic 251s and that style machine, that case, which had the cart built into it, had to hold that big heavy transformer, had to hold the big stabilizer coils and the rectifier assemblies, things like that, was utilized in that machine. This machine is much smaller. So it's made as a machine only option, or you can get it with a cart package. And you can also get it in a package that has a dual cylinder rack like shown on the Multimatic, which is excellent because if you're doing TIG process and a MIG process, that's going to be two different types of gases. So you're going to want to have that dual cylinder cart option. But the single machine is great for somebody who's just, be typically welding on a bench and they don't around anyway. So they could mount that machine under a bench, alongside of the bench, or even on a rack, and that would save space just to even getting the machine off the ground.
Yeah. And if anybody's familiar with what, the 220 looks like, or even some of the smaller frame machines, what we call like the 211, this machine on its own, if you looked at that picture, looks very similar. When Andy goes to the mobile camera behind him, you'll see they are quite a bit bigger physically. They are, the size of what a 252 would be when you're on a cart. So it will accept that 12-inch spool of wire versus the 8-inch. So even though it'll split, it's not necessarily smaller in terms of going down to that size of machine, but you definitely gain some square footage of putting that on a table if you don't need the cart. It makes it more flexible on what do you truly need in your shop and your workspace. You can customize and get what you need. Like Andy said, that dual cart is nice if you start doing some multi-process stuff. If you've got a small fab shop where you want to have a spool gun hooked up, do aluminum or stainless off from that, and steel out of the machine or something like that. All of our Multimatic products have 2 gas solenoids built into those machines. So if you want to hook up the argon gas to the TIG side and then have your steel stainless running on the other, you can leave those hooked up all the time without having to switch over. Or like Andy said, he's got a spool gun on one of his where we could run that gas directly to the spool gun and then have the other one going into the machine and have all that set up at once and not have to spend a bunch of time switching the machine over from one process to the other. So we'll cover that a little bit more as we go as well. But at the end of the day, trying to make these machines as flexible as possible to suit your needs. And, you don't have to buy a bunch of stuff you don't need if you want to throw it on the bench.
Yeah.
So with that, Andy, do you want to show us, again, we saw that pulse steel, but I believe you got some pulse stainless set up there as well. So do you want to show us the difference of a little bit what the Millermatic versus the Multimatic look like? And then while we're transitioning back to that, James, do we have any questions coming in yet?
No questions, but we do have somebody saying thank you to Andy for solving a problem that he had last week. He fixed his cousin's XMT by replacing the TIG pedal. So
perfect. That limit switch was not letting it all the way off the pedal.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Let me show you. So what I'm going to do, let me switch to this camera first and show you the front panels of the different machines. So they are very similar. First, we have the Millermatic. The Millermatic has your auto setting and your pulse buttons up on top, and it has your home button on the menu, which is always on the left. That home button will get you basically into a standard setting where you can get into the setup menu. You can scroll through and you can select your wire and gas that you're using. In this case, I'm using a steel with a C10 gas. Now, C10 is going to be 90% argon and 10% CO2. Here's where I also select my wire diameters. We have a lot of different adjustments in here. If you want to manually control your pre-flow time, your post-flow times, your run-in speeds, this will get you into that setup menu where you can really adjust everything infinitely. If you're a micromanager welder guy like Trav and he gets in there, he likes to adjust that thing from top to bottom sometimes to suit his weld engineering needs. I'm kind of that guy who likes to sit down and weld, so I tend to go ahead and just use the auto settings. So if I go to the auto set and turn that machine on, let's go to pulse, turn the pulse off. It's going to give me a hookup diagram of what I need to do to get the cables in the right configuration. And on auto set, all I need to do now is tell the machine my material and gas. So I can tab through this and it selects between a number of different settings. So I'm going to be using mild steel. There's a program in here for mild steel using the same gas as I would if I was using pulse. So there's a non-pulse short circuit program, which is that 9010, and which is what you also need for pulse. So I can weld with short circuit or pulse using the same gas, which is, you know, typically not done. If you get in that higher 80s to 90 range of argon with a standard MIG machine, your weld beads are going to look high and ropey. They're not going to fuse in at the toes. But this machine has programming ability for that. I also select my wire diameter. And then all I have to do once I do that is tell the machine what thickness I'm welding. And a machine sets itself into a target window. That target still gives me a range that I can adjust the machine without getting in an area where it's going to put me out of a weldable condition. So this is excellent for like just start, like I'll just go right off the bat, you know, 1/8 inch setting. Here's my inches per minute, my wire feed speed. If I want to go pulse, I can do the same thing. There is auto settings for pulse. There's my hookup screen. Again, auto settings for pulse are going to be a little bit different. Instead of voltage and wire feed speed, I have arc length and wire feed speed. I can turn the pulse off and the auto set off if you want, and you can go into full manual settings, like I said earlier. So,
and just a quick note on that gas, for anybody who's not familiar with spray or pulse spray, typically you've got to be at least an 8515 gas in order to get into a true spray process. A lot of times, if you try doing that on a 7525 gas and just up your voltage, you're never really truly going to get past more of a globular type transfer. So that 8515 is typically the baseline for pulse or spray. You have to have that higher content versus what you need on a short circuit. Like Andy said, most of the time that would require a gas change going from one to the other. The engineers back at the plant realized that, you know, if I've got this machine, I might want to leave one bottle of gas on the machine to do pulsed or short circuit. Like Andy's got that same 035 wire right there going from one to the other. And then if I've got the Multimatic machine, I want to use that second bottle for my argon, for either a spool gun or, you know, doing the TIG side of things. So that way you could still get by running both and do them well without having to have, you know, a steel gas for doing your short circuit and another gas for doing your pulse, and then you lose that space for your argon bottle that you would need if you wanted to do another process. So having that single gas built in really makes it convenient to expand that capability of the machine beyond just steel and bring in either that MIG side or a spool gun, whether it's with argon and aluminum or if you had a trimix in stainless, something like that. So it gives you a whole lot more flexibility on this machine.
Yeah, we actually do have a question coming in from the chat here about gas. Is the flow rate the same or different with pulse welding, or is it variable depending on the thickness of the material compared to short circuit?
Sorry?
Yeah, really, it should be pretty much on par for what you would have set up for short circuit. You know, it might be a very minute change. There's not enough gas content change there for it to be a huge difference. Like you would have potentially if you were going to a different style torch, like a TIG torch versus a MIG torch, where you're cutting that gas flow down pretty significantly. Typically, your flow rates are going to be similar going from one to the other. So you really shouldn't, once you have your environment set up. So if you're in the same shop in the same similar location, you know, when you swap over from pulse to short circuit, it should be a very similar setting. Have you seen anything really different than that, Andy?
Yeah, no, that's going to be determined too by the orifice of the cup that you're working with. So like the nozzle that's coming up and how the gas diffuser is set up in the MIG gun. That's really, you know, it's optimized for that size orifice of your nozzle. If you're changing to a smaller diameter nozzle and you left the flow rates higher, you might find that you have too much gas and it might actually cause some turbulence there. But yeah, typically speaking, you don't have to change your flow rates just because you're going from pulse to short circuit or vice versa.
Yep. Like Andy said, if you've got it coming out of that torch correctly and you have coverage for one, you should have it on the other.
Yeah.
Now that may change. Like if you went to a pulse stainless and started running a different gas, a trimix gas or something like that, you might have some adjustment. But like if I take that 90-10 and go right from pulse to short circuit, you should be fine.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yep.
So Multimatic, you're going to notice a couple additional buttons on the top. Because it's a multi-process machine, we still have our pulse and auto set buttons up on top, but now we have our process buttons up here as well. So I've got MIG, I've got stick, and I've got a TIG button. I'm setting up for auto set and pulse again. I'm using stainless steel. If I turn the pulse off, again, it's going to give me that same hookup diagram and how to hook. It's also going to tell me what gas to use. So here's one thing you may want to make note of is your gas. If you're going to weld stainless with regular MIG without pulse, it is a different gas. But when you add pulse, it's using a different gas mixture. It's still a trimix gas, but it's 65% or argon, and whereas before you're in a 90% helium gas. So the gas is quite a bit different for pulse. It's actually going to be cheaper because you're using more argon than you are helium. I'm gonna be welding this basically. I got a piece of 1/8 inch here. The programs in this machine are set. They're set really well right out of the box. I kind of adjust my arc length up a little bit for me, not much, but again, you have that range to work with in auto set, so you're not going to get yourself way out of the ballpark. And I'm using 035 wire. And with this 035, I've welded down to 18 gauge material with this machine using auto set, just basically out of the box. And the cool thing about pulse is it still gives me that control without having to move real super fast, like you would if you were in a spray mode. So, which is another good question. Why is there not a button for spray? Can the machine still do spray? Yeah, it absolutely can. Really spray is just more of a function of a higher voltage setting in your regular MIG area. So,
yep, with that change in gas.
Yep.
And another thing to keep in mind for anybody while he's setting up and putting a safety gear on, of that arc control or that arc length is going to be another variable that's different on this machine face than what you would see on your standard short circuit. A lot of times for somebody just starting out on pulse that's having issues, we'll step up and that will be down to 18 or 20, thinking that that's more of a voltage setting. But that is truly the length from the unburned tip of the wire to the plate. And whether, like Andy said, whether I'm running 100 inches a minute or 500 inches a minute, that machine's going to try to give me that same physical length. It's changing a few different variables in the background. So something to keep in mind there, that's just a nominal number. On some of the other equipment, it might be a 0 as a baseline instead of a 50. But again, that is not truly a voltage setting. So most of the time I'll see that between 48 and 55 maybe, unless something is different. So not a huge adjustment there typically, but just keep that in mind too. And that's going to be true for any type of pulse equipment. That's going to be a different setting. It's not truly going to be a voltage set.
Yeah. All right. So here I got my piece of stainless. I am wanting 1/8 inch material. And let's run this quick.
So again, you're going to hear more of a buzzing noise there than anything. It shouldn't be that snappy bacon frying sound that you hear out of a short circuit.
All right. I'll brush that slightly. Get to a different camera.
And again, while he's doing that, for anybody that's just joining us, please sign into YouTube. You've got the ability to communicate with us via James through the chat function. We'll try to answer any questions that we can for you along the way here, whether they're 255 related or not. We'll try to answer any welding questions that we have for you, and we'll have some giveaways here at the end. So stay tuned for those.
Now, all I did after I welded this is I just took my little brush and I literally just wiped it, and you'll notice that the weld bead is fairly nice and shiny.
And that's straight out of the box. You guys got a couple different scenarios you want to play with. That's fully adjustable as well. But to get up and running out of the box, those auto settings make it quick to do so.
Yeah. And like I say, all I did was, like, for me, I've done a few of these presentations now with this material, and I found that I had to just set my arc length up a little bit. I went from 50 to 54. I probably could go up a tad higher. If you could hear that, I don't know if you could hear that, Trav, but there were a couple spots where I did have the arc end up being a little bit too close, and you could hear the arc. It didn't stumble, but you could hear it pop a little bit. So I would have probably increased that arc length just a tad, and you could have got it to be a perfectly smooth weld.
So like we were talking about a little bit earlier, there's a few different versions of these machines available. So you can essentially build the package to what you need. So Andy's going to cover a little bit of the baseline for us on what these standard machines look like as machine-only packages versus the older 252 products, while we're waiting for some more of those questions to come in.
Yeah. So if you're familiar with the older packages, the 251s, 252s, the biggest thing you're going to notice, what we talked about a little bit earlier, is the fact that this machine can be ordered just as a standalone machine. That's basically the baseline package. You can also order it as a package with a cart. But the big difference you're going to see really is going to be in the duty cycles are increased, and the top end amperage is increased. So the older 252s, they would redline about 300 amps, and the new machine goes up to 350, which on a machine that is pulse capable is critical, because it does have to reach those high peak amperages, like Trav said, and it does that really fast. So that is increased. The duty cycle ratings are also increased, and basically you get a whole lot more for a whole lot less, because this machine only weighs 84 pounds. The old machines were over 200 pounds. So I don't know if you've ever had to throw one of these in the back of a pickup truck by yourself, but you're not doing it with a 252. However, with the 255, you could take that thing off the cart, because the cart actually, it's called our Easy Select cart, which we'll talk about and show you, but it easily comes off the machine, and you could throw that machine into the back of your truck. It's 84 pounds, and then pick up the cart separately. So basically you get a lot more machine for just about the same amount of money as well. So I don't know if you can see those prices, but those are basically the standard prices that we kind of promote. But you could go to your dealer, and they have the freedom to sell it for what they're wanting.
Yep.
The Multimatic, the other thing you're going to notice too about the differences between these machines is, with the older machines, you're kind of at that 200 to 230 volt range. The 255 Millermatic comes with a molded plug on it, the standard 50 amp welder type plug for your regular 200, 208, 230, 240 voltages. But the Multimatic, because we see more of these placed in more manufacturing facilities, they have a wider voltage range. You could run these anywhere from 200 to 575 volts. So
and that's going to be a big play for anybody that's joining us from up in Canada as well. We see that very common up there.
Yeah, otherwise down here, it's like 208, 230, 460 is very common here in the States. But that's one reason this machine, the Multimatic, does not have a plug on it, because we don't know what you're plugging it into. So you would have to put your own plug on that cable. But again, the main differences are going to be the AutoSet Elite, the weight differences, the higher amperages and duty cycles, and the addition of Pulse MIG. So in this category machine, this really is the only machine in that area, this category, that's going to be Pulse compatible.
Yeah, so if you're looking at Andy's background, if you take these machines and compare the power to weight ratio, we're a pretty substantial difference in the new equipment versus the older stuff. And we'll talk a little bit more about the cart and bottle coming up. Like Andy said, we've got a couple different versions there. But if you do have any questions, again, on pricing, we've got a distributor locator app or location on the website. You guys can jump on there if you don't know who your local distributor is. We don't sell through a big box retail or anything like that. We only sell through distribution channel. So if you've got a question on who you need to speak with, jump on the website. You can find the closest distributor that'll tell you whether they got a service center, if they've got a demo lab, things like that. While we're waiting here, James, any questions coming in for us yet that we can answer for the crowd?
Yeah, we got a couple questions here. Will the Multimatic 255 run an LumaPro gun, or would the spool gun be the way to go?
Excellent. Yeah, it will run an LumaPro gun. Both machines will. And I guess I would say, depending upon what your primary work environment is, if you're doing a lot more aluminum, you might want to do the aluminum because you can buy the larger spools of wire. Ultimately, that's going to be a cost savings because, if you had to buy as many of those small little 2-pound spools for aluminum that in a spool gun, you'd be spending a lot more money on those than you would on the larger spool of wire.
Per pound.
Yeah, per pound. But a spool gun will still also work on this machine, and a lot of people don't realize that you can pulse aluminum with a spool gun. So I can show you that as well. We can do one of those right now if you want to. But I can show you that you can absolutely use a spool gun to pulse MIG aluminum.
Yep.
I would recommend our newer spool guns because they do have heavier contact tips. The older spool guns had just smaller tips like you would find in some of your smaller regular MIG guns. But because you're using pulse and you're running higher amperages on pulse MIG, you're going to want that heavier, bigger copper tip.
Yeah, so not to say that you couldn't put a Spoolmate 200 on there, you absolutely could, and we'll talk about gun on demand coming back a little bit later, but that 30A is going to be a little bit heavier duty solution. And like Andy said, where we see a lot of spool guns still is, say, a fab shop that wants to be an all-around welder and just focus more on repair. That a lot of times is a spool gun opportunity where I could keep steel with the Multimatic. I could keep steel on the MIG side, aluminum on the spool gun, and then you've got your TIG side for your steel stainless there, or from the LumaPro side of things, where if you're mainly aluminum fabrication, that's where we would see more of that setup there. And we'll talk a little bit later on the internal on the brake setup, the tension for the spool. That works out a little bit better nowadays on this machine versus the 252 for that spool gun, for that LumaPro gun on the aluminum side of things as well. So some advances there that make that process run a little bit smoother in conjunction with that pulse capability.
And,
so that pulse capability is absolutely night and day difference quality-wise on an aluminum wire.
Oh, yeah. And one thing you could do, too, is, people don't realize that, they all automatically assume your spool gun is for aluminum. But if your primary work environment is with aluminum and you're using the LumaPro, which is a push-pull gun, you could put a steel roll of wire in your spool gun if you only need to do steel 10% of the time, right? The spool gun doesn't care what it's pushing. And the program in the machine doesn't care what gun you're putting on it. So
right.
You could easily put steel in your spool gun if that's only a small part of your business.
Anything else coming in for us yet, James?
I think you guys already answered the other question. Do these machines work with single phase 220 current?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
Excellent. So one of the other changes we had talked about a little bit, and again, please keep those questions coming in. For anybody who's just joining us, we'll be giving away some prizes at the end. So make sure you sign into the YouTube chat function. You can communicate with James directly to us if you have a question. And then at the end, that's how we'll select the winners for our trivia questions as well. But one of the things that's different, like Andy had said, this machine is removable from the cart. So there's a couple different advantages that we can gain from this new Easy Latch cart. So Andy, you want to talk through a couple of things that you like about this cart?
Yeah. So when I first got my machine in, the first thing I noticed is the machine and the cart come in separate boxes. So if you order the package, the cart isn't already kind of pre-assembled on the machine. So you've got to put the machine on the cart, which is super simple. There's no tools needed. The Easy Latch system is easy for a reason. There's no tools needed. You just spin the locking nut off and you can remove the locking clamp from the machine and the cart, and the machine can be removed. But the other cool thing is, because you don't have the base of that cart holding big transformers and stabilizer coils, you can, use the bottom of that cart for storage. And there's a door opening on the side, an access door that you can get into that and store your extra MIG guns, your consumables, your safety gear. You need to do in that bottom drawer, or that's not a drawer, that bottom, opening
Cabinet.
of the cart. Yeah, cabinet, whatever. Yeah, but there's no drawers in it. It's just an open space underneath there. But the other thing, like I say, I loved about it was I've had to move it from my workshop to my home shop, and I wouldn't have been able to do that by myself if it was a regular machine. But being able to pop that machine off the cart and throw it in the back of my pickup truck, now I can easily pick up the cart by itself and also put that in the truck. So moving it became a lot less of a headache.
And one of the other things that you'll notice right away, I'm sure, is that bottle looks like it's going to tip over. That is on purpose, and a couple of reasons why. The first one is going to come back to exactly what Andy was talking about. If I take that machine off from this cart in a traditional setup with that bottle standing straight up, there's a likely chance that cart would pop a wheelie and drive itself across your shop and cause some issues you don't want to see, versus having that little bit of lean increases the stability on that cart when you pull the machine off from the cart as well. So you could leave that set up there and take the machine, split it off. Say you're taking the Multimatic somewhere to do a stick weld, whatever it is, and bring it back. That will stay put. The other piece of it from a stability standpoint is if you think of a 252 or 251 or even a different size machine of this platform, of you grab that front handle, go to move it across the shop, and what's the first thing that you hear? That bottle rocking back and hitting the chain. And it's just something that's always been. You don't really think about it a lot. Till you grab a hold of this thing, you notice it doesn't move. It is extremely solid. It's still easy to roll onto that cart as well. It's a low roll-on point for that cylinder. So it's not any more difficult to put the bottle on there, but it's a whole lot more stable once it is up and running. So a couple big advantages there. And if we go back and look at the other packages we had talked about here, you can see that dual cylinder cart also has what I dub an IV rack on the side of it, where you can hang an extra gun on the side of that. Again, if you had a spool gun or whatever that may be, you get that piece as well. So you could have a spot to hang extra torches or an extra gun, something like that, while having both bottles hooked up at the same time. So like Andy had talked, you can really piecemeal this to what you need. Yeah. Machine only, machine cool single card, machine and a dual.
Yeah. One of the things I like too about this, Trav, I didn't even think about that, but we had a question one of the other sessions about running this thing off a generator, but or like an engine drive, So, we talked about it in one of our other streams where we were doing the live streams on the new 225 and 260 machines that Brian was doing. We did one of those yesterday, but the question comes up quite often is, can you take this and run it off of a generator or a generator welder? And most companies get a little bit nervous about that, but our engines that we design, this engine will definitely run on a generator or welder generator. And because it's so portable, if you're one of them smaller job shops, but you do have a Bobcat or another type of welder generator, and you want to do some field MIG work, machine will run off the auxiliary power from a Bobcat or Trailblazer type welding machine.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit. Andy's going to go into a demo for us again of a MIG weld versus that pulse, or a MIG and pulse versus the spool gun, where we have that dual cylinder cart on one of the machines. Andy's actually got a couple different bottles hooked up back there as well. But we want to show you what we call gun on demand, where if you have that fab shop where you want to keep the spool gun hooked up, makes it extremely easy to switch over from one to the other. And while we're doing that, James, while he's getting back to that machine, do we have any more questions coming in yet?
We do, yeah. We've got one from Steve here. Can you use the wireless foot pedal with the 255?
Yeah, sure.
It's not going to be standard in the TIG kit for it, but it is definitely something that it will work just fine.
The other thing, it's not necessarily a question from the chat, but we've got a couple people in the chat talking about maybe what some alternatives could be for a 255 if you were looking at something maybe in a lower price range, but maybe it has similar features. So was wondering if you guys could make a comparison maybe between the 215 and the 255, or the 220 and the 255, just so they have a couple other options to kind of think about.
Oh, well, first off, right off the bat, I see like a 215 as the little brother to the 255.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of the same feature sets, being that it's DC. We talked a little bit earlier about the Multimatic 220 being the only AC multi-process machine, but the Multimatic 215 is like a smaller version of the 255, but keep in mind, it does not do pulse.
Correct.
Basically, a lot of the other stuff that we spoke about, that 215 will do. It stick welds, it TIG welds DC, and it MIG welds, and it MIG welds great, and it has the auto set elite. So
you're going to lose. It's not going to run 60-10 nearly like a 255 will. Like Andy said, you lose pulse capability, you lose some output capability, but you do gain 115 capability back, or 120. So you could take that and run it on a 120 circuit, which you can't do with some of these bigger machines. Physically, it's smaller. If you go to spool guns, those are going to be smaller, lighter duty all the way around. Some big differences there, but some advantages that go both ways. And then we can get the 220 coming even more feature set than what we have on some of these as well.
Yeah, I've done 60-13, 70-18 only on the 215. That's my experience only with it.
And it'll run a 60-11 just fine, which most people aren't running in their garage anyway. But if 60-11 is very, very similar to a 60-10, that would be that same type of rod, fast freezing. If you want to do a open root, something like that, 60-11 and run it great. Same thing with the 220. But again, there you're gaining AC capability. So with that machine, you can TIG weld aluminum and magnesium, which you can't do on either of these other ones. You still have that 120 capability. But again, you're going to have less output than what you do on the 255s. So it's going to be a give and take there. But that's kind of your sweep of the multi-process machines right there in that immediate class of machines. So if you got any other questions on that, if we didn't cover a certain piece of what you guys are looking for there, feel free to reach out and we can cover that in a little bit more detail, a little bit more specific if you've got something you need.
Cool. So I wanted to quick show you that that gun on demand that Trav mentioned. So gun on demand basically means that I can leave both guns hooked up to the machine at the same time, and I can just pick up whatever gun that I want. Let's say it's the spool gun. So this is my spool gun. If I pull the trigger on the spool gun, you'll notice that the machine will automatically change over to the spool gun settings that I used last. Okay. If I pick up the MIG gun and I'm welding steel before and I pull the trigger, you'll notice that the machine will automatically switch over to those settings. And it like I said, it remembers the last settings that I welded at. So, that's a pretty cool way too if you want to do some, some multiple process welding, or even have different guns set up for different processes. You can just easily switch that over from one to the other, and the machine just seamlessly goes with it. So I'm going to put on my safety gear again, and I'm going to do a pulse MIG on aluminum with the spool gun.
And again, something with that spool gun that a lot of people don't realize while he's setting up is the fact that you could run pulse steel, you could run pulse stainless through there. We see a lot of guys that are in farm repair where they'll throw a spool gun on there just to get some more length out of the machine to get up on, something on a tractor or on a combine or a trailer, something like that, where it doesn't necessarily have to be for aluminum. By far, probably the biggest usage for it. But that, again, doesn't really care what you run through it. And a lot of people don't realize that you can run pulse through that. So definitely some added capability adding these spool guns on.
All right. Sorry, Trav. I didn't clean this aluminum first.
That's my favorite. If it's there before, it's there after.
Yeah,
but
I know. I get it. But I like showing it in the worst case scenario. So I'll brush one for you if you really want. But this is going to be pulse. I'll even do a little whip pattern on it to try and maybe make it look a little bit more like everybody wants stacked dimes, right? I want my stacked dimes, but I'll make this look more like a TIG weld, just a standard, just straight pulse MIG. So watch your eyes.
So again, you'll hear this is a little bit higher buzz than what we had heard, maybe when Andy did the stainless. But again, it's going to be set up just like that was, where you get initial contact with the wire, but then it's spraying across that. It's not truly coming down and hitting the plate, exploding like you get with a short circuit. Aluminum is very, very picky from a quality perspective. It steals your heat very quickly. So running a short circuit aluminum weld is hardly ever used, even on thinner material. So pulse capability, like in this 255 or the 250 platform, is a huge advantage. And this is 255, obviously, is the only one that we offer that way. Part of our there's only one campaign that we're doing right now, and that's why. But a huge advantage here for aluminum specifically is that pulse capability.
Yeah, too many lights shining.
Very reflective.
Yeah, that's what I like about aluminum. It's shiny. There you go.
There you go. So an advantage here, like Andy said, you grab whatever gun you used last time, pull the trigger, it's going to remember the settings. So an all-around job shop, repair shop, places like that gun on demand works very, very well in keeping you up and running. And we can talk a little bit about the newer guns too before we jump into the internals of the machine. Andy's going to take us on a little bit of a ride with his cell phone and show us some of the features that are built into these machines now. But we've got a couple different gun options where we've got an additional gun that you see here in the picture as well that's got some LEDs that can scroll through some programs on the machine. But all of these are going to come with our newer style MDX gun. For anybody that's familiar with the older M25 gun or something like that, you'll notice the consumables on these guns, which I can switch back into. You can show them the actual version of it there. They've got a whole lot heavier duty front end, and that's coming back to the pulse. So like we had talked earlier, pulse is going to go to an extremely high amperage, even compared to, say, if I'm running at 200 amps, you might be at 400 on the top side. So heavier duty nozzle, contact tip, things like that in order to take that heat. So you'll notice those are a little bit different. The gun itself has a little bit of an overmold on the handle, and it's got a ball and socket on the back that I like, which doesn't seem like a whole lot of movement, but if you're using it all day long, makes a big difference. The Easy Select gun that you saw back here also has all of those, and it has the AccuLock system we'll talk about here in a second as well. But it's got some additional programming capability that Andy's going to talk about as well.
Yeah, the Easy Select gun, it looks exactly like the standard MDX gun, but it does have a set of LEDs on the back side of it. So those LEDs tell you what program you're in. So both machines, the Multimatic and the Millermatic, have the ability to store 4 programs. To tab through those programs, all I need to do is hit the trigger. If I want program 1, you see I've got 1 LED lit. If I want program 2, you're going to hit the trigger twice, and so forth, right? All the way up to program number 4. So if I hit the trigger 4 times really quick, oops, I went too far. Bad. There's 4 programs right there at your fingertips. So if you remember what I did at the beginning, I welded that short circuit weld, and then I immediately did a pulse weld. So I've got a short circuit program on program number 1. Program number 2, I have a pulse program for the same material thickness. So I never went back to the machine and switched that. If you don't have the optional Easy Select gun, you can still store those programs in the machine, but you're just going to have to go back to the machine and hit program 1, 2, 3, or 4, to get your settings. But I build a lot of cars. I build some race cars. If I'm welding on a chassis, there's an areas there that I like to use pulse, but there's some areas that I like to use short circuit. So I don't have to go back to the welding machine every time I want to make that adjustment. I just got to.
Or if you got a vertical weld, you want to do something like that. Having those 4 programs right in the gun makes it so you don't have to stop. The other piece of those that are different, like we said, is the AccuLock consumable set. We talked a little bit about that contact tip and the cup being a little bit heavier duty. But another unique advantage to this system is the liner. So you'll see there's a little brass piece on the front of that liner. This liner actually loads from the front of the gun and then locks itself into a sleeve on the back side of the torch, where previous renditions, you would always load those from the back side of things, and then you would clip that wire at the front of the gun. A lot of people don't realize if you coil that gun up one way, that liner gets longer. You coil it up the other way, it gets longer or shorter. And a lot of times that would equate to that liner being cut a little bit too long or a little bit too short. Or if you get a burr on the end of it, got to recut it, then it ends up too short. Whatever the case may be, that's going to cause some alignment issues. So a lot of times if you had to take your contact tip even off your machine in order to get the wire to feed, if you burn up a tip or whatever, that's all because that wire is not in perfect alignment, where this system will give you a whole lot more positive, direct, consistent feed all the way through that torch from the back to the front and give you a whole lot better feedability there.
Yeah, definitely. It's a much better, it's actually even easier to put in just for that reason. The contact tip is longer. You'll notice that. The threads don't go all the way down the contact tip. It almost looks like it has a boat tail, like a bullet has a boat tail on the backside. That extends into the gas diffuser right there where the liner meets into that, and that kind of butts up right near the liner. And again, like Trav said, ensures that you have perfect alignment of the wire going into the tip, which makes the tip last longer too. So you're not always running that wire along one side of the tip because the liner wasn't cut properly.
And that's also going to do a couple more things for you. That longer tail will help cool that piece of copper with the shielding gas as well. But like Andy said, if you do use these a lot, you can actually clock that contact tip 180 degrees and basically wear on a new side of it. If it does start to wear on one side, you can actually spin it and relock it again. Most people don't take the time to do that, but you absolutely have that capability if you wanted to. So a lot of new advantages in the full rendition from the AccuLock setup, the MDX gun, or the Easy Select gun with the 4 programs built in there too. Again, you can build these how you want. That Easy Select gun is always going to be an option, so you don't have to pay for it unless you need it or want it. But always something you can add onto these machines. So keep that in mind as well.
What else I like about this Trav too is the nozzles screw on. They're heavy duty. They screw on, and I like that because, well, okay, I'm going to be one of those guys again, right? There are times that you might get some weld spatter in your nozzle. Everybody does it, right? They take that thing and they beat it on something to just kind of break that stuff loose. But this nozzle, because it's screwed on, whereas the slip-on ones I didn't feel were as good. If you beat that gun a little bit, that nozzle starts to loosen up.
Yes, let's turn it into a very expensive hammer.
No, let's not do it a hammer, but there are times where you accidentally...
I've done it.
Right?
I think we've all done it. But yeah, again, and for anybody who's just joining us as well, we're going to be giving away some prizes here in just a couple minutes, so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. We're going to ask you guys a few trivia questions. You have to be signed into the chat function to answer those, so please do that. That'll be coming up here in just a second. Before that, James, do we have any questions coming in from the group that we can answer?
Yeah, we had a question from Mike the Welder. He's got a 350P with a 30A spool gun. Can he pulse aluminum with the spool gun with that setup?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that machine's going to work with the gun on demand, just like these ones do as well. So you should see if you pull the trigger on that spool gun, it's going to remember your old aluminum settings. If you pull them on your steel gun, it should remember those as well. And that's true on that machine as well. You could run steel or stainless through that spool gun. It doesn't really care.
Yeah.
Just make sure you get it set up correct.
There is a little jump liner in the head tube of that. If you're going to switch wires, especially if you're going from, say, steel to aluminum, make sure you change that head tube, because that head tube will be contaminated from running the steel wire through it, and the aluminum wire will pick up that contamination. So that's the only thing that I would recommend between the different wires for your spool gun is just put a new head tube liner in it. It's simple, it's cheap. But yeah, that Millermatic 350P was, basically the predecessor. We still make it, but that was the predecessor to this 255 product. It does have a little bit more power and capability, but yeah,
the bigger brother.
The bigger brother, based on the XMT family, actually.
Anything else coming in for us, James?
I think we got them all covered for right now.
Perfect. Well, again, after we do the trivia as well, we'll stick around for another minute or so on the chat to answer any questions you guys might have at the end. It seems like we always get a couple last call questions, which is good. And then if you got anything that's a little bit more in depth, feel free to email James when his contact information comes out. If you got a more specific question, you want to give us some detail behind a question you asked earlier, feel free to do that, and we'll try to get any answer we can for you, either from us or from internally at Miller as well. Before we do that, Andy, you want to take us on a little bit of a tour of these machines and what you've got set up there that you've been using as far as the Millermatic, Multimatic, your gas setups, all that kind of stuff? We're also going to look inside the machines a little bit. Like I said, there's a couple changes there versus what we've seen in the past.
All right. Let's see. So basically, here's my setup right now. I've got both machines set up and kind of a little bit restricted in my area. I've got all my cables kind of laying around, but I've got the dual cylinder rack on the Multimatic. And like Trav said, it does have the additional cable storage and gun storage when you do get the dual cylinder rack. I'm running the Trimix gas for the stainless, and I'm running a bottle of argon to do TIG if I wanted to do TIG. And then I added one of our dual regulators, dual flow meters, to the argon tank because I'm running the spool gun off that same argon gas. The Multimatic does have both of those gas solenoid valves on the back, like Trav mentioned earlier, so you can keep everything hooked up at the same time without having to change a lot of stuff. He talked about the easy latch. Trying to do this without making you seasick here.
You're doing all right.
So the easy latch, again, it's easy. No tools needed. I'm just going to loosen the bolt. And the lock just pulls out of the slots that are cut into the base. There's 4 of these latches. I've got the other ones already disconnected. Here's that storage space underneath the machine. I've got my original MIG gun because I'm running the easy select gun on this machine. I have the standard MIG gun inside the storage compartment. But now that this thing is completely disconnected, which I don't know if we can do this, I can pick it up with the machine.
How much can Andy do one-handed? That's the name of the game right here.
Well, my buddy Len from the home office, he's brilliant. He got me one of these these little pop, whatever you call them, pop socket things, and you can put it on the back of your phone. So right before
it appears you busted it off.
Yeah, right before we went, it fell off. It fell off the back.
Useful.
So it worked great, Len, by the way, up until about 5 minutes ago. So let's go look at the inside of the machine. So inside the machine, you're going to notice a couple things that are going to be different. The housing is going to be the same typical wire drive assembly that we've used in quite a few other machines. It's that cast aluminum housing. It's very robust. One of the things you're going to notice too is on the front of the machine, typically your receptacles were mounted on the front of the machine. Well, now they're inside the cabinet. So you've got your trigger leads for your standard MIG gun, and you've got your connector for the spool gun. I like that they're inside the cabinet now, because before, when they're on the outside of the front of the machine, they're exposed and you have the chance of dropping stuff on them, pulling something over the top of them. They break more, but inside here, they're definitely more protected.
Even the back of the gun, a lot of times you're changing the gun and aren't paying attention, forget about it, and go to pull that gun out of the housing and hit the end of the line there and end up dropping the backside of that torch right onto that amphenol. A lot of times it would crack it. So definitely more protection there. The spool hub, like Andy had said in there, has a little bit different design on the brake and the spool lock. So that works out better on the aluminum side of things, where we can actually take and set that,
show you that
better for the aluminum side of things versus having the standard brake with the spring like some of the older stuff that we had. So some definite advantages there if you're looking to run aluminum.
Yeah, I could have showed you that. I guess I forgot about that part. You want to bring that? Do you have a graphic of that? Because that, I think, is a very good improvement based on some of the other machines, was that hub assembly.
Yeah, so you see that up in the top left corner where it used to be to change from a 12-inch spool to 8-inch spool or something like that, you'd have a spring in there. Now that's a threaded adapter, and then like Andy's saying, for the aluminum brake, that's a nut there on the end versus actually having to get out some tools again for that.
Yeah, I like that, especially if we had somebody talk about the push-pull guns, the AlumaPro guns, that new spool tension adjuster there right in the center of that hub, that is critical in setting your spool tension when you're doing aluminum, because you want just a very minimal amount of tension on that spool hub, just enough to basically keep the wire from unspooling itself. But the aluminum needs very little tension on the spool, and this new design is excellent on setting.
James, anything else coming in for us before we jump over to the giveaway side of things?
Yeah, we got a question here. How tight of a circle do you recommend for wrapping your wire feed guns, especially if you store it under the cabinet or in general on the machine?
The wrapping of the gun, I mean, as long as you're not kinking it, right? But when I showed you the gun wrapped up underneath the machine, that's perfectly acceptable. The bad part is keeping the gun wrapped up while you're trying to feed wire. So if you're only trying to weld maybe a foot or two away from the machine at a bench, and you still have that liner wrapped up real tight, that's going to cause a resistance of the feeding of the wire through the liner, and you may experience some slipping at the drive roll. So that's where I would recommend, that's where it's more critical to open up that loop or lay it on the ground, right? So that you're not tightly looped up. But
because if you look at that, those all come in the boxes. I would say there may be a 16, 18-inch diameter circle for a lot of these 250 to 350 amp guns. You'll truly have to fight that liner quite a bit to bend it enough to kink it. Like if you try putting it in a 12-inch circle or something like that, chances are you might actually do that, because those liners are a coil for the most part of steel.
That's a monocoil.
So you can actually kink that off. So that, like Andy said, that's the challenge. But typically if you're an 18-inch diameter circle or something like that, where you're under that cabinet in the machine, you're just fine. Anything else for us?
Oh, no, I think we got everything pretty much answered.
Beautiful. Like I said, after the stream, we'll stick around and leave the chat open for maybe another minute or so, something like that, to get any last call questions once we're done. If you have anything else, feel free to shoot it over to James. He's going to put his contact information in the chat function for us as well. Yeah. So the way this giveaway is going to work. Oh, go ahead.
We didn't have a whole lot of questions this time, so this was kind of.
That's good. Hopefully, we're answering them all.
We might, we have a lot of. We might have a lot of repeat guys. I think we got a lot of repeaters. Maybe they already know
maybe if you've been on one of our other streams, give us a shout out and let us know. And we thank you. We thank you all for that. We thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. Like I said, we're going to do a giveaway on some of the different points that we've covered today. The way this is going to work, you have to be signed into the YouTube chat function in order to be able to communicate with us. So make sure you do that real quickly if you haven't yet already. One of the things that we're going to be giving away here, I'll replay my cooler video, but I think this thing's pretty neat. Again, while you're looking at this, James is going to be on the line. He's going to be your direct connection to us and back to you on who is the correct winner. We're going to go by whoever shows up as the first correct answer on the Miller timestamp chat log. That may be different than what you see. On your end, we've actually had quite a few instances where you truly show up in a different order on your chat log versus what you do on the Miller side of things. So we've got to go off the official one that comes into Miller. So if you have a question on that, on who's selected as a winner, please email that over to James and we'll connect with you and get that cleared up on why somebody was selected as the winner. We're also going to try to limit to one winner per stream, per event. So again, we appreciate everybody's time and stopping in with us today. We'll hang out afterward. Other than that, again, thank you for being out there for us. Obviously, your support makes us be able to innovate and do some of these unique processes like we've done with the 255 platforms. We've also done some of these streams on the new Bobcats with the remote, things like that. So appreciate you guys doing that. From a shipping perspective on any of these giveaways, if you win them as well, we can ship within the U.S. and Canada. Beyond that, you have to get a hold of us. I think we'll go to the nearest freight forward or something like that. So in any restrictions beyond that are going to be pretty typical for what you see in different giveaways. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. The way, like I said, we're going to do this is we'll ask you guys a question. We'll wait for the first correct answer to come up on the chat log. Andy's going to be our resident model, selecting our prizes for us out of a box. And he also has some of those different giveaways there. But again, these are some of the prizes that we're giving away: helmet, jacket, gloves. That helmet is one of our Digital Elite series with the older, more retro logo on it. One of my favorite helmets that we've made. So
that's the one I was using today, actually.
Without anything else, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. So for our first question, we're going to be a true or false question. Pulsed MIG welding requires at least a wire of a diameter of 0.45. Is that true or false? So we talked about this process being a little bit different than short circuit in the way that it operates. A couple of unique settings, a couple of unique features to the process itself. Overall, we're trying to get a little bit higher quality weld most of the time with pulsed MIG. But does it require an 0.45-inch diameter wire or not?
We got Leonardo L with false.
Leonardo, yeah.
That is absolutely correct. Congratulations once again. We appreciate you coming back to visit us once again. So
he should be one of our. He should be a guest star.
We might nominate you to teach the next seminar that we give. But thank you again for stopping by.
What's he getting?
The weld jacket.
He's got the weld jacket this time. So question number 2. What tools are required to remove a 255 from the Easy Latch cart? So we talked about this newer design of being able to separate that machine from the cart, which we've not been able to do in the past. What tools do you need to do that?
Got Josh with hand.
That's correct. That's the only
works.
tool you need. Well, I guess you could probably use, I don't know, maybe use your foot, something like that, but you do not need an actual tool to remove it. It's going to be made to take off by hand. Loosen that
hand
up.
Tool.
Congratulations. Question number 3, another true or false question.
Wait, what did he win?
Sorry about that. I went too fast.
Yeah,
he got the helmet there. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, beauty.
The next question, if you've read it already, is going to be a true and false. Pulse MIG welding requires a different shielding gas than the 7525. 7525 by far the most common short circuit gas out there. And you've also got the C100, another common one. But is it a different gas that we need to pulse?
Looks like we've got Mike the welder with true.
So that is correct. So the baseline is going to be typically an 8515. We've got programs built into the machine for that 9010 gas to work all the way around. So congratulations there.
That was for, what if you can see it here, not?
That was for the gloves and the
metal
hat,
gloves.
correct?
Yep. The metal fabricator gloves and the hat.
Perfect. Question number 4. The Easy Select MDX gun can toggle through how many stored programs? So this would be the maximum number that gun has on the face of it. Andy talked about being able to go through from his short circuit to his pulsed, potentially if you're going to go vertical, things like that. How many of those programs can we select with that gun.
All right, we've got Adrian with 4.
That is correct.
Adrian wins
I'm betting on it's a pair of gloves.
the TIG multi-gloves. Yep.
So congratulations on that. We'll draw the cooler up here next. But again, thank you all for stopping by, spending some of your time with us this afternoon. If you have any more questions, concerns, comments, please feel free to leave them out in the chat. Email them to James. These videos will post afterwards as well. We'll watch the comments onto these videos and try to answer you from that route as well. And you can always feel free to send an email into the info at Miller Welds. Any way you can contact us, we'll try to get back to you guys. So thanks again. This is going to be for the cooler. Andy's driving around his shop there. Like I said, it's deceptively small in the video. But for that, which 255 is capable of running on up to 575 volt input power? We talked about a few different versions of the 255, different capabilities there. Which one will run 575?
Yep. Millermatic or Multimatic?
And again, while we're waiting for that answer to come in, please check out the website. There's only one. Sweepstakes is still going on through August 2nd. We're selecting a different winner each week who purchases a product, uses the only one code when you do the product registration, puts you in the sweepstakes to win a Bobcat 260, Multimatic or Millermatic 255, or the Multimatic 220 AC/DC, whichever one of your choice. So please check that out. If you got pricing questions, please go to the locator tool, find your local distributor, and connect with them on any pricing. Thanks again for stopping by. James, do we have an answer yet for our cooler winner yet?
It's going to be Ed Hanley, looks like.
Excellent.
Our cool cooler.
Congratulations, Ed. Again, to all the winners out there, please send your contact information to James. If we don't know how to get a hold of you, we don't know how to get your address to ship you your product. So please do that before you jump off. Again, we'll leave this open here for another minute or so to catch any last call questions. We'll answer those for you. If not, we appreciate your time today and have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you.